We're so glad that you're here. Welcome to the Conference Task Force on Economic Inequality Fishbowl discussion. I'm Billy Fidlin. I'm Director of Outreach and Justice for the conference, and I am your moderator for this evening. Our goal tonight is to examine the urgent issue of economic inequality in the United States. What is happening and why should we care? And what we as individuals and as the United Methodist Church and others can do about it. The short answer is this. Over the past 3 decades, there has been remarkable growth in income and wealth in the top 1% of United States society, while poverty has increased at the bottom and the middle class has basically stagnated. The United States by far has the most unequal distribution of income of all developed nations. The United States ranks 64th in the world in income equality. So that means there are 63 nations with less income inequality than we have. But an even more startling statistic is that the world's richest 85 individuals have as much wealth as the poorest half of the world's population combined. In the United States, the 400 richest people have more wealth than the bottom 150 million Americans put together. To clarify, wealth is the value of what one owns, so your savings, properties, and investments. Income is what one earns, so salary, bonuses, interest, dividends, those kinds of things. Now we have some wonderful fishbowl participants that I would like to introduce, and if you all could just wave when I say your name. Please welcome Pastor Deb Schauer, General Conference Delegate Julie O'Neill, Reverend Louie Lyon, Reverend Khalif Smith, and Attorney Tom Griggs. Thank you for coming. Now you'll notice there is one empty chair on that side, and that is our fishbowl chair. I would like to note that this is for audience members to fill in. You would not circle back to something you heard 10 minutes ago. What you simply do is you jump into the conversation where it's at. Our panelists have been instructed to be kind to you and to let you know. You'll have about 5 minutes to participate, depending on how many people are in line to speak. Now, chairs for those of you that might want to join in are right there. Now, if our czar of chairs, Chris, could wave his hand. Chris is going to be the one who will usher you in, or kind of keep an eye on him because he's going to tell you to get out as well. Okay? And so about 5 minutes. But on the other hand, if nobody else is in line, we'll let you stay a little bit longer than that. Let's see. Okay, and then during the last half an hour of the evening, we're going to address possible solutions. The panel will start off with that, but then we'll open it up to you guys for solutions, as well as any questions that you might have, and we can all just kind of have a chat for about a half an hour. Our goal is to get you out of here around 8:30 this evening. Now, our first set of questions are about, they stress the faith-oriented moral compass at the personal level. You're going to be asked to raise your hand if you know of people that do A, B, or C kind of thing. It's going to note cause and effect. The remaining questions will force us to consider the decisions that we as voters play into the social collective level. And what I mean by that is we, as a public, are forced to consider the decisions that we as voters play into the social collective level. So we are forced to raise our moral compass and then to apply our actions, and equally as important, non-actions, as citizens. Since we live in a society in which the government is of the people, for the people, and by the people, that means we are the government. We elect people, and thus we have a faith-oriented responsibility to avoid government policies and laws that hurt people, that make people suffer, or that in fact can lead to someone's death. The general idea is to try and sensitize our moral conscience to address policy decisions made by us. We are the government. Sometimes this elevation in our moral compass may simply be represented by a single question, and that question is this: what, in the Christian principle, what would Jesus advocate or want? In conclusion, you have before you in your hands a document. That document is not for this evening. You don't have to read it. You don't have to look at it now. That document is for you to take back to the local church, for you to hold your own fishbowl there. Now, I want to address something because we have had a couple of calls. Is this political? Yes, friends, it is. That's the simple truth. But also, is it biblical or holy text oriented? The answer is yes, friends. That is the truth. Because we as people of faith face this dilemma now more than ever. Can we raise our moral compass to help those who are in need? With that, I'm going to go to our first question. I would like everyone, so both you and the panel, to raise your hands if. Do you know someone or a family that finds it difficult to make a living that sustains them and their family, providing food, housing, childcare if needed, etc.? Do you know anyone like that? If yes, please raise your hand so that we can see. What effect does that have when it is so difficult? Anyone on the panel, please.
But although I don't know of anyone specifically in my sphere of influence or neighborhood and that kind of thing, I suspect there are people that I run into every day that do face this dilemma, and they just don't acknowledge it for whatever reason. And one of the things that I think we need to recognize is that if we find a family or individuals in this situation where, as the question says, that the median annual earnings are about $18,000 for 44% of all workers, well, that doesn't even make the minimum wage in Arizona, which I believe for this year is $12 an hour for a 40-hour work week and so forth. So as a result, you're going to have a perpetuation of, or the cycle will continue, for lack of a better phrase. No college, no savings, probably no health care, and living in an unsafe environment or neighborhood. And quite possibly having to face other issues that we can only imagine.
Right. Thank you.
In addition to being a Methodist pastor, I'm chair of the Salvation Army Sun City West Valley Advisory Corps. And we deal with folks that come in all the time that have an income, and this will blow your mind, of $5,000 or less. There are 4 or 5 families living together. And then when it comes time for Christmas or the holidays, these folks are working jobs, but they don't have any extra income for purchasing for their children or anything like that. And so they're there, but they're under the radar.
Again, show of hands in the room. Do you know anyone who has been unable to get health insurance? I want you to look around the room and see how many of us can name someone. Do you know anyone who has been unable to get needed medical care on their insurance policy as they have it? Do you know anyone who has major financial challenges or even bankruptcy because of the medical costs that they're facing? To my panel, when you're faced with that, what effect does that have on you long term on those people?
I come up this from multiple perspectives, having served in churches that have food pantries, clothing pantries, do social justice work. And typically what we find is that those who are struggling with medical benefits typically find themselves without food. And that's usually because even if they are earning an income, that income goes toward housing, that income goes toward transportation, so that they are able to get back and forth to whatever low-paying job that they are struggling in. And then what ends up, the medical bills pile up, and food is the last thing that they end up purchasing. So what they end up doing is going to food pantries and food banks in order to just survive. That then perpetuates bad health, doesn't it? So usually or typically what you can get from the food pantry is sugary foods, high in cholesterol, high in salt, high in sugar, and which then perpetuates this idea that you're eating poor food. That poor food then puts you back into the hospital, which then you can't pay your medical bills, and it's an ongoing cycle. So what I have seen, particularly working social justice ministries, is that this is a systemic problem that then continues to cause more problems as it goes on.
Julie, do you have any comments on that?
Sure. I just want to point out that economic inequality has so much interconnectedness. Racism plays an impact, health, obviously, mental health. And I think one of the things that I have discovered a lot is people who are in situations where they have a limited income, they find themselves having to face choices that they never thought they would have to make, whether it's food or electricity. Those are some simplistic ones, but it's also which part of my health am I going to tend to right now, and hopefully cross my fingers that this other part that I'm not tending to doesn't have something catastrophic doesn't happen in the meantime. And it's these choices that put people in such a difficult and heart-wrenching place.
Also, what kind of comes from this whole thing too is the emotional part of it. Whenever you are in a situation to where you can't provide for your family, that boosts your self-esteem far down to where you look for something else to take away the pain. And that's where you have this other things to just deaden it, that you don't want to have to deal with that reality that is out there. And so there's that aspect too that is pulled into this that just deals with the emotional side of it.
Thank you. I want to move on to the third question now. Same thing, a show of hands from everybody in the room. Do you know a family where the parents are unable to afford childcare? Think about how that limits the family's employment opportunities. Do you know a family where the children must attend a school where the classes are oversized, where limited resources are available for special needs and gifted children? Do you know a family where middle and senior high school students have adequate encouragement in their interests, yet the fact is in their school, advanced academics, arts, and athletic programs are no longer available? What effect does it have on kids when they don't have a counselor to talk about being bullied? When you have a gifted student who has no means to excel? When you have a disabled student who is mainstreamed into a classroom, pros and cons on that? So what effect does it have on the child?
It's real simple. They shut down. And they don't. They turn to some of the other means of trying to cope with what's going on. When you ask that question and you see, we know what's going to happen to those individuals, but then we have to jump on this whole thing. Maybe we're not looking at that yet, but what are the causes of these issues? Why is it happening? And that's where we need to look at. It's dealing with poor legislation, that people aren't or don't want to be aware of what's going on. They don't. So many people just don't want to recognize what's going on with your neighbors. It might be your neighbors. It might be right there within it.
Well, I live in an area that is a senior community, and we don't pay school taxes. But the next senior community over does, and they're tied to the Kaiser School District. And basically what happens whenever there's an override, the senior community votes it down. And the families that have young kids that are in Surprise and other areas out there, those are the programs that are eliminated. And so it's dealing with people looking at taxes and saying, I want to have the lowest tax, and not looking at the overall what it does.
Julie?
I think educationally, from a very practical perspective, if you have young children who start out and they're in public school and they don't have some of these quality types of education, developmentally they're slower at learning. They could develop more learning disabilities. Their attention span can sometimes be shortened. It even comes down to education about healthy foods. And if a child then is always fed a diet of convenience store or fast food, they don't develop a taste for foods that are actually good and nutritious for them. So it's even things like that, that all of the intersectionality of poor schooling leads to poor nutrition, leads to bad health, leads to all of these other things.
But what about the future, when they're adults? What effect is there having gone through school without, fill in the blank? What about when they're adults?
Yeah, so I can speak to that. Having served as a chaplain to one of the best school programs in Las Vegas area, they have an NJROTC at Centennial High School, which is, it rocks, right? It really helps kids to develop. But what they found in that program, that many of the high school students had one meal a day. And even the ones entering into the program were not able to, on the surface, you see this great school, you think these kids are getting a great education, but the ones who are living in poverty and living in disparity are the ones who oftentimes are labeled the trouble kids, are often labeled the bad apple. They're disruptive, they can't learn, they're put into special needs programs and those types of things, and called developmentally slow, which is absolutely untrue. They have the ability to learn just like everyone else, but they have been deprived. And so when they enter into the workforce, there is no drive, there's no motivation. They oftentimes seek very low income jobs because they don't have the skill set to go forward, or they just don't see the hope in getting advanced education. And so it then begins a cycle of a family which continues to stay in poverty because they can't earn the higher incomes because they haven't been either to college or trade school. So it does have a profound effect on generational poverty.
Anyone else on that?
Can you repeat your question that was this we were kind of
What if,
talking about?
and especially this is good because Jill is within the educational system. There you go.
I have an interesting perspective to this, working as a speech language pathologist, and I work with middle school students that their disability is expressive and receptive language. So right there, if they can't express themselves fully or they don't understand fully, is their first roadblock. I work in a middle school that we do not have a social worker. And because we're a B school, we don't deserve a social worker. And I am working with students, I work with a wide range, but some are nonverbal, but this year has been, some of you know, for my group has been particularly difficult this year. So just in this last month, I'll give you a quick snippet. A student I've been working with for 2 years, 8th grade boy, his dad jumps around from jobs as a cook in a bar, so he doesn't have steady employment. Sometimes they're couch surfing, they're homeless, sometimes they have an apartment. And he is struggling with that his mother wanted to give him up for adoption. But with expressive and receptive language, he has trouble, talking about this, needs extended time in answering questions or getting his thoughts out, and he's been struggling a long time. So last month, I spent extra time with him, and this is an 8th grade boy. They're usually pretty jerky, right? 8th grade boys. He's sobbing and crying because he can't fully express himself about being given up for adoption. And this impacts his education, his self-esteem, his mental health, and he admits that he's contemplating hurting himself. with a specific plan. Now, my background is also as a rehabilitation counselor, so I know those red flags. So I did not leave his side until Dad got there and we were with the nurse and things like that. And so my heart was just breaking for this child. Last week, super happy little girl. I pick her up at the classroom before we pick up 2 other students and say, hey, how you doing? She's usually just a ray of sunshine. Well, DCS was at my house last night, and my brothers and sisters are really mad at me because I told the truth that she smacks me and chokes me. But I really feel safe there. But I had to tell the truth. Again, expressive and receptive language delays and very naive social problem solving delays, borderline IQ. She's at risk for a lot of things. Another child, dad's in jail. Mom has a boyfriend who's on dialysis because he's an alcoholic. He's the one that's home. The night before, he didn't have dinner because he beat him up in the kitchen and was pulling his hair, and he just ran to his room and he didn't have dinner. So how do these children come to school to focus on learning? Even if they are, in resource or the lower education level, they're not able to learn because their basic needs are not met. And our school, because we're a B, we don't get a social worker. And our psychologist only tests and doesn't do counseling.
Can you explain what a B class school is?
Your academic grade. Are you an A school, a B school, C, D? And there aren't enough social workers, so only the schools that are F and D schools get social workers. And because our schools aren't fully funded, that's why we don't have social worker positions or funding for the position of social workers. So,
And she's a B school.
and we are a B school, that's
So what
why
about the C school? What about the D
Yeah.
school?
still even next year, we won't have a social worker. And this is actually a fairly affluent area of Paradise Valley School District. Most of the children are of even white privilege, and they're struggling with these issues. So what do we do for our youth? How do they become productive and purposeful citizens if their basic needs aren't met? Their food, their health, their safety. I don't, so I see it every day, and all I can do is kind of do my job
Thank you.
and do our work on our goals, but all I can do then is love on them too and encourage them.
Thank you. And the fact is that, who are the kids that really have the best opportunity to excel and succeed in this work? Is it the low-income child? Is it the $18,000 a year child? Thank you, Joe. We have another person that's ready to come in, Reverend Scott.
Well, yeah. So before becoming a pastor, I was a school counselor. And my main area of specialty was ensuring that poor kids and kids of color were given the opportunity to take AP and IB classes. That was the hugest obstacle of my career. Because oftentimes, the wealthy kids and the white kids and the Asian kids were automatically placed in AP classes, and the poor kids and the kids whose parents did not know about the need to take AP and IB classes were overlooked time and time again. Disproportionately, we had the majority of African Americans and Latino students being placed in either regular or below average classes, not even given a chance to take college preparatory courses, and oftentimes not being given information in regards to moving on to college. But there's a few different things going on. Number one, oftentimes their parents don't know what the information to give them. As a child growing up in Las Vegas, my mom and dad did not know that they should have been advocating for me to be in the IB program at Valley High School in Las Vegas, Nevada. They just didn't know. All my best friends were in that program. I didn't even know it existed until after I graduated and came back as a school counselor. But I was gifted in many different ways, and I've gone on to be successful. But I'm the first child in my family to have a college degree, and we have one other child thus far in the third generation that has a college degree. So it really does, and I come from a low-income area, and we have not broken the cycle of poverty in my family. When I go back home, we're in the hood, we're in the dangerous area, I have multiple family members living in my mother's house because that's what they have to do to survive. So this is the reality of my life, and it's definitely tied into education and social and economic inequality.
Thank you, Kim. Do you know anyone who has found it impossible to get the college or vocational education they need due to the rising cost of tuition and other expenses associated with it? Hands up, please. Thank you. Do you know anyone who has incurred so much student debt that it is severely impacting their financial well-being and will for some time to come? Do you know anyone who has had to take on employment commitments while in college in order to afford their educational expenses, such that their ability to function well in an educational environment was compromised? Too tired, too exhausted. All right, so those are the scenarios that we've laid out to the panel. What effects do these situations have on the future of the students involved, and what do you think the cause is?
It's more than just to the student, it's to the student's family, because I have a daughter that has 2 children, and she not only has a full-time job, but she has to have, during the weekends, to work to try to pay off that student debt. She's a social worker, her salaries and all that high. And so that therefore affects the entire family.
Well, and your comment about clergy persons having significant debt right up to the time of retirement is unfortunately a reality in our society, even with other professions. Many of the medical doctors that I know, general practice doctors, have significant, and I'm talking 6-figure, student loan debt that they're paying off even as they're practicing throughout their life. And they will be lucky to get it paid off when they reach 65 or 66. There are a lot of different reasons for it, not the least of which is the high cost of the educational system now. And some of it is redundant programs put in for different reasons, some of which is for liability reasons to avoid lawyers like me. And some of it is related to the difference in science and technology that we have. But the end result is it's a significant problem that needs to be addressed. That's why something like tonight is very valuable.
Do you know anyone who is retired and must choose between buying prescriptions and food? Do you know anyone who is caring for an elderly spouse or relative and has no options if they require more care than they can provide? Do you know anyone who faces complete uncertainty if their pensions are compromised? I don't know how that could happen. Or if they live longer than their retirement accounts can support. Louie, can you talk about some of maybe the people that you have, counseled and been with Pastor to, and their difficulties as well as what caused those difficulties?
Yes. When I first was appointed to Sun City in 1997, I was shocked that I had members of the church come to me and they had to make a decision on whether they got their pharmaceuticals or bought food. This is a well-to-do area. Well, when I dove a little deeper into it, I basically found that they've outlived their savings because the expenses today were not filtered in when you look at what they would be receiving on their retirement. Then with a medical issue that comes up, they have to pay the bill or keep getting notes and letters. And so it is that same kind of cycle. But today, I don't serve strictly in a retirement community. I'm in a more upscale community. And there are still people that come to the church and say, I don't have food, I don't have gas, I am waiting for disability, but that takes forever to go through that process, and there is nothing in between for them while they're waiting. And we try to help with what little resources we have. We send them to other places, but there are so many people that are in that boat that we can only do so much. We say, you can't keep coming back every month. But the point is, it takes months and months for someone to go through and actually be approved for disability if they're in that particular situation.
Okay. I'd actually like to go straight on the panel, and I would like you to specifically address retirees.
So I've served in my 5th or 6th appointment since I started in the ministry. And every single church I've seen the same issue. I've served in the North Georgia Annual Conference and as well as here in the Desert Southwest, and I can tell you that it happens across the country, across the nation. The same thing that Louie was talking about in terms of outliving one's retirement, getting to a point of a medical issue that may interrupt their ability to have savings, and then also the idea of fixed income as well. So whether that's on disability, Social Security, whatever retirement plan that they had fixed, and the inability then to procure food or just basic necessities, then put them into a downward spiral beyond that point.
Julie worked for the General Board of Church and Society in Washington, D.C. for many years as well. So Julie, just any insights you could give us, maybe historically from what the board was working on and then your own experiences?
Sure, thank you. I'll start with a personal experience or a personal story. I know somebody who is approaching retirement. Early in his life, he didn't go to college. He worked in Bash's supermarkets, had a good job, started getting into a lifestyle of drugs. So he lost his job because of that, and since then he has gotten back on his feet, but his pension stopped many years ago. His retirement savings stopped many years ago. He is currently employed, stable. The work that he does right now is contract, so he does not have health insurance through his employer. He does not have health insurance. He does not have pension savings, a 401k. The money that he has saved is not nearly enough to get him anywhere past retirement. So I think that's, I say not now, he doesn't have health insurance now, but he didn't have health insurance, but he does have it now because he went through Access, Arizona Healthcare Cost Containment System. He had to apply for Access because while he was working, he fell from a ladder and shattered both of his ankles. Before that, he did not have health insurance because he was willing to gamble that he was just not going to have a major health crisis. He is approaching 65, so that's, so it's, again, all of these things that you trade off in your decisions. I think that, circling back a little bit, I think there's some others that have helped with applying for access. I think that system is privileged toward those who are privileged. If you have a computer, if you have the ability to write a letter about yourself, if you have the time to navigate the system. So I think that as we're talking about retirement, but also state assistance, those are underlying causes and issues that prevent people from getting health insurance. So I'll come back to the general board question.
Within this question that was brought up, and it comes to the whole idea of, as it begins, it starts about how the average person does not have savings. And then there's those who are super savers. But what happens is choices that people are making, even with the individual that Julie was lifting up. And yes, circumstances kind of stepped into his world, but then also it's those choices that he made to where he didn't make that choice towards doing drugs. And it goes back to, well, I'm going to deaden the pain, and so I'm going to go there. And what I see as far as the cracks, and there are things that happen with individuals, and yes, I've dealt with them. I know when I first moved here as a single parent with 2 kids, we did not have health insurance for a long time, and I gambled on the fact that we were healthy.
But what about the retirees in your congregation?
I'm sorry, that's right. So we have, as far as in the congregation right there are individuals that will make the choices with that whole thing. And it's not something that they planned for. They thought everything was going to be fine. But because of the market where things are put in, and so they're in that situation, not of their own choosing. It's not, and they're not going down the cycle that would cause them to lose everything and to be, but they're still in that, and it's the hard choices. And so they're hoping that they'll scale in through it.
I would associate myself with all of the remarks that we've had so far on the panel, but I would also add that in my practice over the course of time, and this isn't divulging attorney-client privilege because I won't talk about a specific client, but over the course of time dealing with retirees where my office was located, I saw many of them, and many of them that wouldn't necessarily fit in the niche that you've described in the question, that might be a little bit higher income level and yet cannot afford the very things you're talking about. So it crosses, I think, multiple levels within our society. And it's a shame to our society and to our legislators that people like this are having to face it. Now, people have to be responsible for the decisions they make. Decisions have consequences. I found that out very early on when I disobeyed my father once. But it is one of those things that it isn't just a personal decision-making that causes this, and it isn't just the societal pressures, it's a mix. But we've got to have something that will fix some of these things, because if we don't, it's going to get worse. It won't get better. And that's the definition of insanity. Keep doing the same thing thinking it'll get better.
Right.
And it won't.
All right, and Kim?
So 2 things. So in my congregation, I can think of one woman in particular who's a retired nurse. And has just recently really began to let me know that she was struggling financially. And what I found with her, like with other retirees, is that they're being taken advantage of in terms of mortgage loans, reverse mortgages, that sort of thing. They get these reverse mortgages and they think, oh, I'm not going to live X, Y, and Z however long, and then they end up in debt because of that, or deep credit card debt. So I'm finding that's more of those people who were probably, not blue-collar workers, but, middle-class workers, nurses in their career, even teachers of that sort. And then when I go back to, in my immediate neighborhood, just to say the people that I knew from Zion United Methodist Church back in Las Vegas, where I grew up, for the majority of them, things are different. And the difference is that they grew up, robbing Peter to pay Paul, okay? And it wasn't a matter of choice to not save, but not having it to save. I'm thinking of the women who worked at Zion Daycare, My mother was one of those women. She worked in childcare for 30 years. And when she retired, she didn't have a retirement. She was fortunate because my dad got a settlement, but so in my side of the world that I know well, I know many people who just simply don't have it. So oftentimes they are living with their children or their children's children, which still brings in lots of other problems into the mix.
That was something else that I wanted to bring up, is that it's not just the retiree and the worry and the stress about not having enough, money to continue on. It then, proceeds to the children.
Yes.
And, the adult children. Can they help out? Can they afford to, support their parent, whatever it might be. And so it is an intergenerational intersection of how big this problem can be. Louie, keep it short.
Yeah, I left out one thing. There's another group, and that is a spouse who has suffered spousal abuse. They had all kind of money, but they come to you and say, where do I go? I can't take it anymore. And they don't know how to function and what resources are there.
And there are people who have committed suicide in the hopes that their family will make money from that suicide. The ramifications from economic inequality are very vast on many levels, affecting all age groups. And I know I received a couple of complaints about this event, and one of them said there is no economic inequality in the United States of America. And I don't even know how to respond to that.
Well,
I know so many people who are living hand to mouth, and when you ask them, people like my age, so, 25, and, but they're living hand to mouth, and when I say, well, what about your retirement? What are you going to do? Are you saving or anything? And the answer is always the same. Number one, I can't save, I don't have the money, and so I will just work till I die.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now, what's interesting about that is society may not let you work till you die because you're too old. It's just this huge, ball of confusion and chaos.
well, I also wanted to just really quickly add, Billy, that the retirement age is going up, right? Our life expectancy is a little longer because we have better medical practices and so on and so forth. And what we are seeing are a lot of retired persons who then have had pensions or retirements that outlive those, return into the workforce, which then causes another problem, right? Because now those who are younger, who would be taking those low-income jobs to suffice or to make ends meet, can no longer get those jobs because now you have retirees who are in the workforce, and we have this backlog of those people who can earn income at the same time while trying to live the American dream, quote unquote.
Julie, quickly, General Board, how much time did they spend on economic inequality?
They spend a lot of their time. There's the social principles. There's a study that has been done, a committee that has been working on revising those, so that all of that legislation is coming before General Conference 2020. They do have a more cohesive flow of the document. One of the key things that they want to do is to continue to dismantle theological biblical teachings that affluence or richness or blessed means you're in God's favor, and poor or not in favor. So to really just break down those teachings, because I think they still go on. They have a good section on the economic community, which addresses all sorts of different areas, including healthcare. Within healthcare, they talk about global health being accessible, reproductive rights, rights of women and girls around the world. So there's a lot. It's very rich. There's a lot of material there. So.
Thank you. All right. In previous decades, financial resources were available to meet the needs that we've been talking about just now, or the situations that currently restrict financial resources, such as money that was needed for education, healthcare, same thing. Some of those are no longer present. And, a lot of that's been legislated out or voted out by whatever level, was handling that. So what I would like to hear from the panel is this. Where have the financial resources that used to be available for these kinds of things gone? But the deeper question, is it always a bad change, or is some of that a good change?
Well, as it relates to at least my own experience, when I see music programs and art programs cut from the public schools because that's considered frill, or that's considered not the basics, we need to get back to reading, writing, and arithmetic. Well, that's all well and good, but it's short-sighted, because they've done study after study after study to show that if somebody has an aptitude in music, it has a multiple layer effect in mathematics and in science. And yet, far too often, we have taxpayers, and I won't pick on seniors since I am one, but the idea is, I don't want to pay the taxes. I pay the taxes for my kids, I don't want to pay them now. I want reduced taxes. So when you ask the question, where did the money go? Some of them went by reductions in tax. And And that's all well and good. I'm not gonna say I love to pay tax and I'm standing right there to pay taxes, but you pay what is appropriate for the benefit of society. If you're a member of society, you have some responsibility to the men and women that also make up that society.
Amen. Part of my 37 years in ministry, I was a school teacher. And in California, they had something called Proposition 13, the Jarvis Tax Amendment. That's why I left California and came to Arizona. I lost my job, anyone who'd been there 14 years and less, because property taxes paid for schools. And when they cut property taxes in half, which is what was there. So based on what Tom said and what I have seen to be evident is there needs to be, I believe, a look at priorities, and then based on the priorities, setting up a funding mechanism. And it doesn't just have to be to property taxes is what it's been in many of the places. So you need to ask what is important. And I think that's where we probably lack right now.
Please.
Yeah, maybe I can give you a different perspective on this as well. I think a lot of the reasons why we see the drop off in those types of activities in schools is because we have seen the rise of those activities in privatized areas. So private music lessons, private teams and sports and athletics and so on and so forth. The same reasons that people are not attending church as much are the reasons that you see the reasons that they're dropping those programs from schools. But that also plays into economic inequality, right? Because of the areas that have privilege, that have the money to fund these types of programs on the outside of school, don't have them in the public school, don't have them even in the private school, and then those who are economically able to do that are able to go to schools that do have programs that of music and arts and so on and so forth. Right now, I serve in a church that it partners really closely with Heritage Academy, which is a kind of a private school in downtown Mesa. I can tell you that they have one of the largest music programs in probably the Phoenix area. When they come over to our church to rent the space in order to do choral programs and choir programs and symphony programs and so on and so forth. So I think the privatization of these arts and physical activity programs are what really has drawn it out of the schools and put it into privatized money.
So to the entire panel, does the church have a role in this dilemma?
So when I was serving in Georgia, our role, what we found was that we began sports programs through the church, right? That were very low cost, that could not compete with the private programs, but at least gave an opportunity for some of the youth and children of lower incomes to be able to participate and be able to grow into maybe being able to compete eventually with those youth. I came from a town that recruited many young men into football programs, D1 schools all throughout the nation, and who eventually have gone on to the NFL. So some of those kids, if they didn't have the church program that and Pee Wee leagues that led them into being able to then compete with some of the kids that had the money from the very beginning, they would not have been able to make that leap.
Julie, does the church have a role?
Absolutely. In United Methodist tradition, our founder, John Wesley, wrote a manifesto. Some of the first things on there were to reduce the gap between the rich and the poor, to make sure everyone has a job, to make sure everyone has a job that includes a living wage, and to have quality education. This was written in 1700s, and so it's still applicable today.
But United Methodist doctrine, as Julie just said, it calls us to respond. We are a justice denomination, and if your pastor isn't talking about it, the pastor should be. especially now, of all times. Is it a risk? Might that person alienate some congregants, et cetera? Yeah, we can go on and on about all of that. But it's who we are, and we've almost forgotten, in that sense, who we are. Deb, what do you think about all that?
And yes, I agree with everything that's been said, and how the problem though that comes with it is that within the congregation, to get people to step up to help do all these wonderful programs that you're talking about, and that's where, because they're busy with other things that trying to make ends meet, trying to do things, and then asking them to come and help with the volunteering of that is the hard part, is to step up to help those that are less fortunate. And a lot of times you're depending upon our retirees to step into it. And they're going like, been there, done that. Which you hate hearing that, but it is a reality.
Tom, go ahead.
Thank you. And I would absolutely agree that churches, Tom Jelinek, I serve in Patagonia, United Methodist Church. I would absolutely agree that the church does need to step up and be involved and be working in the community in ways that can help ease some of these situations. But I would also say that we need as churches, as people who have at our foundation a mandate to speak for what is, or to address what is unjust, to address what is happening in the greater society that is ignoring the vast number of people for the advantage of a very few. How we can not just put Band-Aids on things. And many of our churches have wonderful programs that are doing wonderful things. I'm not characterizing them as insignificant. But what I am saying is, as churches, we need to be speaking to what needs to change in the communities, in the governments, in the nation, to reprioritize these things. And just as a footnote, I would also say, I would encourage everyone, when we look at when funds have been cut from, and this may be in a very circuitous route, but when they have been cut from education, when they have been cut from healthcare, when they have been cut for programs that work with seniors, we need to follow the money and see where that money is now, instead of helping our children and all the other things.
That's here. According to current statistics, in the United States, approximately 400 people or families own as much wealth as the 150 million people, or the poorest half of our nation's population. On a global basis, approximately 85 people or families own as much wealth as 3 billion people, or the poorest half of the world's population. To our panel, what impact does that have on society?
This isn't a new factor or feature. I would commend for everyone's consideration if it's still in print, Ferdinand Lundberg's book, The America's 60 Families, from 1937, which posited the fact that if you looked at the top 60 families in the United States and the bankers and lawyers that were affected with them, they controlled American finance. Nothing happened without those 60 families saying, yes, that's what we'll do. Another way of looking at it is Professor Charles Beard, in the first part of the 20th century, one of the leading historians in the United States, along with his wife Mary. And Charles Beard wrote an excellent text called An Economic Interpretation of the Constitution. And his theory was, this wasn't a constitution about philosophies and trying to do free will and those kinds of things. This was about founders who had a very grounded interest in property preservation. And what they did was they preserved property through many of the mechanisms that are in the Constitution. And as a secondary element to those mechanisms, yes, they did have the ability to say rights of man and every man is equal, provided you're white and a property owner and you're a man. But the idea is that this is systemic. It has continued on down to the present time. It will continue to do so unless or until people like Tom talking about following the money and basically having sunshine, so to speak, and transparency brought to some of these dealings. Because if that occurs, then people will finally, I think, wake up and realize that there are some problems built into our system that can be changed, not overnight, but can be changed, but will only be changed with churches and with legislators having the right heart.
Someone else?
From a Judeo-Christian religious perspective, in Acts 4, 32 to 35 says, all believers were of one heart and mind. No one claimed that any of their possessions was their own, but they shared everything they had. And with great power, the apostles continued to testify to the resurrection of the Lord. And God's grace was so powerfully at work in all of them that there was no needy person among them. Oftentimes, I think we get caught into this this struggle of people throwing out words like socialism and this hyper sense of nationalism. And if you're not totally for capitalism, then somehow you're un-American. And from a religious perspective, as followers of Christ, we need to model Christ believers and walk in a way that is of grace, that is of unity, of equity, of equality, of sharing of our possessions so that others who have need might be lifted up as well. And I think we've run away from that idealism. We do one thing and talk about one thing in church, but we do another thing when we go to vote and when we are going to present legislation.
Or running our own business.
Yeah, or running our own businesses, absolutely.
But is there ever a time, this is to anybody in the council, is there ever a time where this is okay? Where sometimes the fact is one group is going to lose out and one group is going to profit? Is there ever a time when it's okay?
As a person of faith, I want to say no. And in reality, I think for me what's sad is within our Christian faith, there is a co-opting of the prosperity gospel.
Yes.
Very much so the blessed are we's. And that's been so just distorted. And I think that that's where people who claim to be Christians, and I don't think that they aren't, but they very much are cling to the fact that their house and their car and their everything is because they are blessed. And I think that is what is so disturbing about people of faith who claim this so strongly, this prosperity gospel, and it just infiltrates these social systemic issues, and it keeps the people that are impacted by all of these different factors in that place in the name of God. And so I think that is such harm that is being done, and it's
Tom?
Sure. I would affirm that within our society and within the communities of our congregations, that there are people who are blessed. I mean, there are people who are fortunate in that they have been able to achieve success either in their careers or in their financial situations, or however you want to look at it. But I think when we swallow whole the prosperity gospel, as Julie was talking about, we forget what the other half of that is as our faith tradition defines it. What that and the other half is that if we are fortunate, then we also have not just the obligation, but the opportunity to help those who are less fortunate, to ensure, if we're really loving our neighbors as ourselves, the point is we should be offering to our less fortunate neighbors the advantages which we have enjoyed, in many cases through no effort of our own, but just through good fortune.
So have we come to a place, and this is for anybody, have we come to a place where our faith practices are simply based in convenient theology?
Billy, I think it's really important to say that there are billionaires or millionaires that have set up foundations to try to help other folks. The question is, why aren't there more?
Right.
Okay? And the old saying, there by the grace of God go I, when we look at somebody that has been really blessed, they need to stop and ask themselves the question, whose is this? Who has provided this for me? And we know who our source is. It's God.
Mm-hmm.
And if we live our faith, then I believe that some of those billionaires or millionaires that are doing are living their faith, but not enough.
But I think the fact is, so much of our faith, Julie articulated it well, as did Khalif, we're called, especially as United Methodists, we are absolutely infinitely called to live a certain way, but really just in terms of the Judeo-Christian faith, probably the Abrahamic faith, we are called to help each other.
Mm-hmm.
And that's just fact. So do we forget about it? Do we remember it when it's a special offering Sunday? Do we, do we wait until there's a catastrophic flood or hurricane or earthquake? Or do we remember the homeless people that are sleeping right outside this door as you leave tonight? Or at Justice Center or Newmont, and obviously we could go on and on.
Billy, this is jumping ahead a little bit, but I've noticed driving around Scottsdale. I don't live in Scottsdale, but I've noticed when I drive around, there's signs up that say you don't have to give to panhandlers. And I think that, which addresses systemic issues. I understand that, and I think that what I observe is that there's a category of those who are, $50,000 to maybe $150,000, $200,000, kind of that range of income that people make. The selfishness and the fear has replaced moral responsibility. And I think that is, whether they're billionaires and they're good-hearted and they're very philanthropic, or they're making $50,000, I think that the attitude of selfishness has replaced that.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I have to always admit that I was that I was blessed in the family that I was born to. And one of the things that we were brought up believing is that much is expected for those that have received much, and we had received much, and so their expectations were high. And I don't know that that is as pervasive as it ought to be. I know it's a biblically based philosophy, but I just don't know if it's acknowledged. I know I am jumping ahead. Capitalism is not God. Capitalism is a system that is very good in many ways. It has tremendous pitfalls. But I would also submit that capitalism has raised the standard of living for millions over generations. And lastly, I would just simply say, I heard someone talk about socialism. I don't know that people would want to buy into Chavez's Venezuela, or Castro's Cuba, or the Soviet Union, or China when it was run by Mao. because there were a lot of bad things going on. And I admit that Castro's Cuba had a literacy program, as one of our presidential candidates pointed out. But at the same time, that was at the fact that we had many people imprisoned and executed in that same system with their literacy program. So if anyone takes away any of the comments that I have this evening, I would just submit, I like capitalism, but capitalism is not God. Capitalism needs to be changed, because you have hit the nail on the head with so many defects within that system.
Thank you, Tom. All right, I'd like to welcome Reverend Katie Sexton to the Fishbowl. She's the Executive Director of the Arizona Faith Network. Katie, what are your thoughts?
Well, I'm mostly here for the next question, but I did want to add just a little bit to this too. Today, in front of the Arizona State Legislature, there was a bill being heard to make it illegal to panhandle on medians across the state. So I was in Scottsdale for a meeting, and I saw that sign, and I took a picture of it at a red light, because I could not believe that there are signs out there saying that, along with I could not believe that our legislators are wasting their time to make this law so people can feel more convenient and they don't have to be disturbed to
As
see
they
the
did last
poverty.
year, this is not a new proposal.
Right,
So-
and I'm trying not to jump ahead to the next question, but as people of faith, if we're going to live in these values, we absolutely have to be paying attention to this.
In the United Methodist denomination, we have EMCOR, which is the United Methodist Committee on Relief. We have Global Ministries itself. We have Church and Society, which does the advocacy role in DC. But they support each other, and in one way or another, politically and so forth, in terms of getting things done, getting things into our book of resolutions and all the rest of it. But what they do also is ask our conferences and our churches have programs to address these needs. And so certainly in the Desert Southwest Conference, we have many programs that address the needs of all kinds of things: homeless, medical assistance, food support. We've got UMOM, TMM in Tucson, all the rest of it. And we work with the elderly, we work with the disabled, we work with all kinds of programs, as many denominations do. But when these issues are raised on Sunday or in our churches, and we start talking about public policy, we start talking about legislation, we start bringing forward the things that will affect those kinds of issues, those conversations are labeled as political. Our people in our churches not only reject, they get angry. I had calls about this event tonight. How dare you have a political event? Frankly, as a denomination, we are political. That's who we were founded by. So we have that piece. Why? Why is it that Christians are offended by that? And the second piece is, do we first think, before we open our mouth on things like that, well, does the church have a stance on that? We have a book where it says all of our stances. But is that our first thought? Is that rather than getting angry about it or saying how dare this group have this kind of an event tonight? How dare they, when there is no economic inequality in the United States of America, in their opinion? How dare, isn't this totally a democratic event tonight and it's supposed to bipartisan or no partisan at all, just for talking? What about that, panel?
I typically tell people that I don't preach political sermons. I preach social justice sermons. And if you heard something that you took away as being political, I don't use politicians' names. I don't endorse any one side or the other. I speak to issues, and I speak to issues based upon what I see in Scripture and the way that I believe that I'm called to live out that calling in the public sphere. And so, while that challenges people and frustrates them sometimes, I think that is the work of the Holy Spirit, right? And that if that is God's agitation of where you are and the ways in which you act politically, then that is not on me. That is literally on you. And that's maybe something that you have to work through as a person of faith, to think about how is it that I see one thing in Scripture and how is it that I act another way politically. My view of Scripture dictates the way that I act politically. And then when I look in society and I say, well, when we take from the poor and give to the rich, it's called capitalism. And when we take from the rich and give to the poor, it's called socialism. Yeah.
So many isms.
There's so many isms. How do we become political in the sense that we all work to the common good and remove the stigma about public policy making?
Katie?
I'll say my comment so I can scoot off.
Yes, because we have someone else waiting.
I'm going to say something that may not be popular, but I don't know that you can truly be a Christian and not be political on some point. And the reason is Jesus was political and was engaged in the political system. And at the base of that, there is this belief that politics is how we decide to govern and live together as community. And religion teaches us our ethics and values of how we live together as community. And those have to intersect. And while there is a need for separation of church and state, and there are boundaries around that, we have to realize that you cannot separate a religion completely from how you interact in the political system. And we need to interact in the political system too. We made politics a dirty word. It doesn't have to be.
I believe in prayer, and I have uplifted during terrible times or hard times presidents of both political parties. Like Khalif, I don't advocate for one or the other, but just using the example of when I lifted up President Bush during the time of war that was going on, I received unsigned letters telling me how dare I do that. That isn't deserved. When I uplifted our country and President Clinton during the time that there was Monica Lewinsky, I got the same letters from the other side. Politics is something that people who have a mind with blinders that are on one side or the other, they can't, they don't want to see, and they don't practice what it is that they supposedly believe. I really wonder if some of this is being done out of ignorance because they really don't know what it is that the Bible teaches, and maybe that's my fault as a pastor for not getting through to them, but I think that that's where a lot of the problem lies.
Thank you, sir.
I would agree.
I'm Ross Mosser. I go to Paradise Valley United Methodist Church. I'm not sure why I'm up here, except I was sitting over there and told the gentleman who had ushered me up that I'll try not to embarrass myself. As I listen to this, there's a couple of things come through. There's an awful lot of stuff on TV that I refer to as ain't it awful. They get up and they talk about all the problems of the world and it ain't it awful with this and that and this person. And they forget what's the other side, and that is, what are we going to do about it? Okay, what's a plan that works? And what's a plan that you can sell? Okay, our church, PV, was a great big church. It probably still is a big church, but our membership over the last at least 12 to 15 years has been going down like that. And you know what? We are struggling with trying to figure out what to sell the congregation on to make people want to come and join this organization. I mean, we've got 178 programs, I think, that deal with helping the community in various smaller and larger ways. And I was thinking that was enough motivation to get people inspired to get involved in this organization. But it doesn't seem to be. And I heard you say something before, maybe I've taken it out of context, but the half of the people who have a great deal of wealth is given to them and they think they don't recognize that it came from God. They don't believe in God, okay? And yet somehow I think we've got to come up with programs to say for the benefit, of the country. We need to instill these programs, and which is going to have to bring up the wages and the income of the middle class. And we can get all over the topic about how technology has changed and their skills and education are falling behind the curve, and that's a world economy issue. We're not going to solve that tonight. But I think the struggle is to find a way to educate and motivate folks that it's worthwhile doing this for the benefit of all of us.
You did just fine, thank you.
Did good.
Yeah.
Good, good.
Anyone else have a comment on this before I move on? All right. The patriarchs and prophets of the Old Testament in the Christian Bible, Jesus, many of his disciples, and then our founder John Wesley, were unanimous in teaching a priority on serving the needs of the less fortunate and on condemning the personal accumulation of superfluous wealth. Yet many churchgoers resist public policy that would act to give vital assistance to those with less resources by requiring individuals and entities with abundant resources to make fair share contributions. Is this a reasonable response? Why or why not?
I don't believe it is a reasonable response, and there may be different reasons for that response. One of which, and maybe I'm being too cynical, but one of which that I've come to believe over the years is that sometimes people become judgmental, and they make decisions about who's deserving and who's not deserving. And I find that to be sad, but I also find it unfortunately to be true.
I'll stick my foot in my mouth again. There was discussion about the signs on the street in Phoenix and in Scottsdale about you don't have to give. And I don't think any of us would mind giving to somebody that we could really make a difference with. But the guy that lives in a nice home on the west side comes over to Scottsdale, rents a motel room for 3 nights, and stands on the corner and tries to look as haphazardly as he can to make enough money. That's his way of earning a living. And people who don't give and don't participate don't believe that what they're doing is going to a worthwhile purpose. And that's something we need to get over, is to figure out what is the worthwhile purpose and explain it to those that have the ability to give.
In the panel, does anyone want to respond to that particular comment?
Well, it fits just what Tom said about making a judgment whether this person really needs something or not. And I remember when I was first appointed to a church in the Las Vegas area back in 1987, someone came and asked for help. And I had just got there. I really didn't have anything, nothing that I knew was set up. So I called the Catholic priest and I said, Father Cavilla, could you help me to help this person? And his comment to me was, boy, I have to teach you the way it is around here. Now, I have also served a church where I did give a lot of help to people that came in. And I've had people say to me, well, you're just being used. And I said, well, I would rather make the mistake after talking with the person and thinking they really need something than not help the person. So a lot of it has to do with attitude. And, again, I look at there by the grace of God go I, and if I have it, it's my responsibility to be there and help when I can. And the right hand shouldn't know what the left hand's doing. It's being done for the proper purpose. And I would hope that that's how we all can live.
All right.
I could speak to it.
Gary.
Okay. So I also served a church in Las Vegas that had a food pantry, and many of our volunteers would have a big problem as people were pulling into the food pantry to receive assistance that are in a what you would consider a high-income car, right? Mercedes-Benz or something like that. And they say, how dare these people come and use our food pantry to get food assistance when they have a $100,000 car sitting out there and we're carrying a box to a $100,000 car. On the periphery, what they don't really see is that person just got kicked out of their home. The car that they're driving was probably either lent to them or given to them by another family member. They're living in their car and they don't have other opportunities to get on their feet. I've had people who were living out of a Mercedes-Benz come back to the food pantry after 2 years of living on the street and having used our resource and other resources through the church in order to get back into sustainability, come back and say, you know what, thank you for not judging me. Thank you for not looking at me in a way that you saw this car and thought that, you know, I have the opportunity to go sell it or give it away so that I can have money to get on my feet. It was the only way of transportation to get to a job, to get back on my feet and get back to sustainability. And then they were giving back to our food pantry. So it goes along with what everyone is saying. Judgment is critical here.
And also, you know, the fact is, we don't know, you don't know that other person's journey, which is what you both are saying. I've never shared this with anybody, but when my boys were 6 and 3 years old, my husband left me. He didn't only leave me in my 3,000 square foot home that we had built, so on the outside it looked lovely. He took every single penny. I had no money, not a little money. I had nothing. I had $5 in my wallet. It is not easy to ask for help. It is less easy to beg for help. I only want you to answer no explanation. I just want you to answer either political, spiritual, or both. Given the content of Scripture and the writings of our forebears in the Christian faith, is the phenomenon of drastic and increasing economic inequality a political or a spiritual problem, or both? Just go down the line. Political, spiritual, or both? Starting with Louie, please.
Both.
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 So,
Both.
And you all?
Both.
Well, that's no fun. Now we can't. I'd like to go through the panel. I'm not going to give you specific scenarios. I just want you to take like maybe a minute or so and say, what do you see as some possible solutions on any level?
I would like to see us do more in the line of what's getting geared up now in the way of Arizona Career Pathways, where we as a community and a government are investing in people who have the ability to get back on the productivity chain, raise their skills to where they can earn a living at wage, surround them with a support team to help them get it done. I won't get into the details of how that's done, but it's very, very clever and I love it. And it's not for everybody. I mean, you have to start out by testing them and deciding who will be successful if they're given this opportunity. And then, you know, those that know something about the program know it went from just a few people, 10 people in it maybe, and the government's just funded $1 million to put 500 people in the program. So the page is turning and it can go in a whole new direction. That sort of thing will raise the skill level, I believe, of the middle class that their earnings have crashed and give them a chance to come back up into society.
Thank you. By the way, I did want to say, Darlene from UMOM, Wendy Johnson from Justice Center, other social agencies, they will tell you that many of the homeless that they are seeing now are people that formerly were middle class. And that's a new phenomenon. I'm sorry, Tom.
No, that's right. There are many facets to this, but the one that I would focus on is that for too long in our society, we seem to have defined success as a college degree and then a white-collar job. I tend to think that we should do a little bit more like Mike Rowe, the commentator and writer and sometime actor, who focuses on the dirty jobs where people get their hands dirty. He said, I'd like to see more people building the corner office and less about people being educated to sit in the corner office. And I think if we do that, we build the skills up. I mean, think about it. The middle-class society, in many ways, was built on people having a trade and people having a skill set. And it was also built in conjunction with labor unions, and it was also built in conjunction with entrepreneurs and business people that actually had the right mindset. So it isn't a one-size-fits-all, and there is no one answer. But I think a baby step, a good first step would be trying to help people realize you can be a success in life if you have a trade school education and you do well with that trade.
Well, I talked to some different individuals about what I was going to spend my evening tonight with. And what was interesting, I had this one person told me here's something, and so please just listen to what I'm saying. But this person said to me, here's one thing, I think the problem across the board is that we need to educate people to think about these three things. Number one is that you need to have a high school diploma. Right there. Everyone needs to have a high school diploma. Period. Number two, no one, or they need to think twice about, no one should have sex until they're committed into a relationship. Oh, whether it's marriage or whatever you want, but it's you're committed into this relationship. And the third point was, don't get addicted to any type of substance. And I thought that was really interesting to sit there and say that. That's a basic thing. Because we've talked about what's the causes of a lot of this is choices that we make. And so I thought that was really interesting. I just thought I had to share that because it's just a basic thing that we don't want to think about, but okay.
So I had the privilege recently of looking at experiencing a traveling exhibit. It was by the National Building Museum, based on a book called Evicted. How many of you have read that book? I would encourage it. He shares a wealth of information. The fact that within the housing inequality, there's moving companies who specialize in evictions. There's police departments who have dedicated people who focus on eviction. In the state of Arizona in 2016, there were 79,000 people evicted. That was 4 years ago. One of the other quotes he says is, nowhere in America can a worker earning minimum wage afford a 2-bedroom rental home working 40 hours a week. I was in another state, and in that state, the average was that the person would have to have worked 102 hours a week to afford that. Another quick statistic is that in the courts, when you have landlords and tenants who are facing eviction issues, 90% of the landlords have legal representation, and 10% of those who are on the evicted side do not, or only 10% do. I think here in Surprise, Arizona, out on the west side, recently there was a law that was passed in 2010, 2011 called the Nuisance Ordinance. And it was about a woman who had experienced domestic violence. The ex-husband would harass that woman and called 911 repeatedly. The landlord did not like the fact that the police were coming to the house all the time. So the landlord, with this law, was able to encourage the police to evict this woman. She joined up with the ACLU, got them on their side and fought, and actually won in 2016. So that nuisance ordinance is no longer in existence. That is the type of thing that here in Arizona we are facing. Part of the rest of this exhibit had these very interesting practical things. In the city that it was, they were looking at what would it look like to have emergency shelters that can be kind of like tiny homes for people who are in distress, that have no place to live. What would it look like to convert transit shelters, like our bus stations, into temporary housing overnight for people who live on the streets? In the city of Phoenix, and I think probably elsewhere, if you go to city places, there's like benches and things like that. Well, recently they've put a bar, like an armrest, so that people who are homeless cannot physically sleep on that bench. It's those types of things that we can talk to our legislators about and say, hey, this is not right. How are we caring for those? I think, so those are some policy type of ideas, practical type of issues. I think on a personal level, framing things in the context of stewardship. How many of you, when you hear the word stewardship, think of like a capital campaign or pastors who do your stewardship campaigns, right? But what does that mean to be entrusted for all of God's creation, and not just environment and the earth, but how do we care for fellow human beings? How do we care for those who are in our midst who aren't as fortunate? Addressing issues of privilege. That is something that we don't always like to talk about because it's uncomfortable. It makes me question, how am I privileged? Certainly, I have all these check marks that I can say why I'm privileged. But how am I using that to help benefit others? How have we lost the common good, the doing good, helping others? So a self-examination. I'll end with, I don't know how many of you have kind of seen this diagram. It's a rule of discipleship. Across the top are acts of mercy. So acts of compassion and acts of justice. The compassion is the internal part. What are ways that we are looking at ourselves and how we can be more compassionate to one another? And then there's acts of justice. That's the public expression of ways that our compassion has moved us to action.
Julie, you're going to represent us well at General Conference.
Yes, she is. I always go back to my Wesleyan heritage. It's a both and. It's about personal piety as well as social piety. It's about not only learning to be more holy in self and understanding, delving into the scriptures, hearing the word of God, doing these acts of piety in my own home, if you will, and in my own church, but then also social justice. Meaning, how is it that we actively engage social issues through acts of legislation? How is it that we collectively come together and let our voices be heard for the common good and for those who are in harm's way? And so for me, it's the both and, right? It's both orthopraxy and orthodoxy. It's us taking our faith and letting it play out in action in the world, and just kind of taking the example of Christ, not sitting in the temple and waiting for those who are in harm to come in, but also going out and reaching them in their place of need. And so that's the way I think that we go about it.
I like what Tom had to say regarding the need for training, not just the university or college, but for people to learn a skill. But something that I think is really important goes beneath that in a sense. I believe that many people in our churches and in our communities don't really understand the issue of economic inequality. They only know the world they live in. And I use this as an example. When I served in Green Valley and we had the issue with the border, we had people on all sides. And in order to bring the church together and the community together, I suggested that we have a 4-week forum where we had people from the outside coming in from each of the different areas from all sides, so everyone can hear where everyone was coming from and learn. And I think we need to start at that level in our local churches right now, because we're assuming everybody gets it and understands it, and I don't believe that's the case.
Okay.
To me, the most important thing to remember is to go all the way back to the basics, down to the very time when we first all went to Sunday school, and we were told, follow me and I will make you fishers of men. So, we said, in the early church, everybody lived together and they collaborated together and they had success in society together. If we follow him and make them and become fishers of men, there will be more and more and more of us, and we will be able to do more and more for those who need it.
I'm just beginning to get involved in this whole idea of helping. And one of the things I think that's difficult maybe for pastors, because they are not self-assured, but they are Christ-assured, that there are a lot of people who are scared to death. And you can name it. They're scared to death of people that don't look like them, who don't talk like them, who don't dress like them. And until we can get this fear, and by having people show up that are different, I think that this is going to be a stopping point for us.
My name is Ryan Hankinson. I go to Deborah the Desert. Probably going to get booed, but that's okay. I believe we definitely need to get more political. And as Tom will be able to tell you, when the founders first were in Congress, they were part-time. They were business owners, lawyers, and so forth. They made laws to conduct and benefit themselves. And I personally think we definitely need to have term limits on Congress, because now all they are doing, we've got two parties fighting against each other, benefiting only their own party and not the people they represent.
Very early on in the discussion, we were talking about how schools were being given less money, and we didn't talk about the fact that in our state and many other states, we've generated, through laws that have been changed, charter schools, which have taken money away from public schools. If everyone had public schools and if all the charter schools were gone, we would see a lot more money back in the public schools. So it is a group of people that are better than the rest of us, that are funneling money for their kids and for their benefit. And it's not for our benefit. It's not for the general public's benefit. That's kind of stuff angers me beyond belief. Everything that's been going on for decades is the rich and the well-connected making laws that benefit themselves. Tax laws are changed, but the speak that they give us is words so that we're attacking each other, as opposed to looking up and seeing who's making these changes, who's causing oppression in our country. It's not the person that looks different than you. It's the people at the top that are making the laws to benefit themselves. And then we have talk radio and networks that just dilute us with a bunch of talking heads that are trying to convince us of things that aren't true. So we have a lot of non-truth that's out there. And that non-truth is us looking at each other, forcing us to look at each other and saying, well, you're bad because you don't look like me, as opposed to us looking around and saying, what's happening to our nation? What's happening to our, it's not that we don't have prayer in school. So, get off that. It really is about who's making the rules, follow the money, who's benefiting here. And we need to not be looking at each other, because we're not the bad people. We're the ones that are dealing with the consequences of what's being handed down to us. And we can come up with all the programs that we want to help little pockets of poverty and issues, but that's not going to solve the problem. The problem is higher than that. The problem is at our elected level.
I'm a member of the Desert Palm UCC in Tempe. It's a very well-to-do, highly educated congregation. And some of what has been said really resonates. And quite frankly, I struggle with the gap in what you were saying with the conversation that needs to happen in a local church, with my own church of the very well-to-do have no concept of what some of us, I'm comfortable, but I am aware that there's others that are a lot less comfortable than I am in that local church, and we made values decisions that I can't relate to. I'll never have those lifestyle, and yet we're making those choices of who we project as a congregation. And I think that's a challenge for a lot of our churches, because I think in majority of churches, the money rules. Where the money is in the congregation, that's usually the way it goes. And so, out of my social justice, I really struggle with that, where I belong in the church, and I think there's a lot of us with that.
I think one of the things that we can do is to relax a little bit and remember that we're not going to solve all of this tomorrow. This is, to me, is a generational issue, and we need to keep picking at it. The other thing is that these pastors can't do all of this by themselves and can't even organize it within their church by themselves unless they're super people. Maybe some of them are. But to me, what we need in every church is a small group of people. We usually call it the Church and Society Ministry Team. This could be a half a dozen people. And that provides a group of folks that can provide a cover. They can say whatever they damn well please, you see, without anybody threatening them with losing their jobs or all of that. So you provide a cover for the pastor and for the church leadership. You operate with the backup of the church council, which is usually much more willing to do such organizational things than you do otherwise. So than the congregation is in general. So I think that until you can have a group whose primary focus is not on missions and taking care of emergencies, as important as those things are, but who are willing to focus on making systemic change in our society, which has a much bigger impact for the effort you put into it. Yet we literally spend hundreds of times more on missions than we spend on making systemic change.
Right. The missions, for all of you here, take it back to your church. Mission is see the need, fill it. Justice is see the need, eliminate it. Two very different things. We have time for one more comment. It's going to come from our chair, Bob Clark.
The legislature is responsible for what's happened. We need taxes. We can't do any of this stuff without taxes, and they've been cutting it for decades. Okay. How much profit is necessary to make this question pure profit of one person over another? That's okay sometimes, maybe, but how much? You know, they get carried away. Capitalism, it's wonderful, but how much is enough? You know, there has to be regulations. Socialism, we got to have social programs. We still have a constitution. Taking care of our people doesn't make us a socialist country. Right.
Thank you. Let me please thank our panel. It's obvious they did their homework. Okay, the handout that some of you have been following religiously, which really was not meant for that, I can tell you that at the beginning. But the handout, and also for those of us that are watching via video, we can mail you this handout, so you just have to email me at bfidlin@dscmc.org. The handout is for you to take back to your local church so that you can hold one of these fishbowl discussions there. You know, it's great that we have a number of churches here represented this evening, and I'm very glad that you're here. If in fact you think that you need help, that is what your team is for. And so contact me and I'll put you in touch with the Economic Inequality Task Force, and we can help you as needed. But the point is, we need to widen the audience. We need to help others understand. It's exactly what you said, Louie, that people really don't understand economic inequality and how it affects so many people.